The wind owned this place. It was the first and last truth of the valley, a ceaseless mourner keening through the skeletal cottonwoods and scouring the dust from the hardpan earth. It had stripped the paint from the ranch house until the wood beneath was the color of old bone, and it worried the loose shingle on the barn roof with a rhythmic, maddening clatter. Silas Blackwood stood beside his wagon, the deed, signed and sealed in Abilene, a heavy rectangle in his coat pocket.
$50.
The price of a good horse for 160 acres, a house, a barn, and a ghost. The men in town had chuckled as they took his money, their eyes darting with a mix of pity and avarice. They spoke of a curse, of a family vanished into thin air, leaving behind only whispers that rode the ever-present wind. Silas was not a man who trafficked in whispers. He saw good water in the deep well, sturdy bones in the house despite its ragged skin, and soil that, with work, would yield. He had bought the land, not its legends. He pushed open the groaning door of the house. A fine silt coated every surface, a pale shroud over a life interrupted. A rocking chair stood askew, a child's rag doll lying face down beneath it. The air was thick with the scent of decay and disuse, a coldness that had nothing to do with the autumn chill. He moved through the small rooms, his boots echoing in the profound silence. Kitchen, parlor, 2 small bedrooms. All empty, all bearing the same film of gray dust. He felt a pang of something, not fear, but a deep and abiding sorrow for the lives that had evaporated here. He ran a hand along the rough-hewn mantelpiece, his fingers coming away gritty. It was as he turned to leave that he saw it. A faint scuff mark on the floorboards near a tall, dark wardrobe, a disturbance in the otherwise uniform layer of dust. It was new. His movements became deliberate, silent. He was a wealthy man, but he had not become so by being careless. He was a rancher who had built his fortune on observation, on reading the subtle signs of land and beast. He listened, and for the first time he heard something other than the wind. A breath, shallow, hitching, terrified. It came from within the wardrobe. He did not call out. He did not draw the pistol at his hip. Instead, he walked back to the front door, his steps heavy and measured, and opened it to the screaming wind, leaving it ajar. He went to his wagon and retrieved a waterskin and a wrapped parcel of jerky and hardtack. He set them on the floor, a careful distance from the wardrobe, before walking back outside to begin the long work of unloading his supplies. He would not make the house a cage. He would make the world outside it safe enough for whatever haunted thing was inside to step into the light. She watched him through a crack in the warped wood of the wardrobe. Hunger was a physical claw in her belly, a constant, gnawing pain that had long ago replaced all other feelings. Fear was the air she breathed. He was huge, a silhouette of a man against the stark, unforgiving light of the doorway. She had seen men like him before, men whose quiet was more menacing than any shout. She had been here for months, a ghost in her own home, surviving on the last of the root cellar's withered potatoes and the rainwater she could collect in a bucket. The men who had left her here, after everything, had spread the story of the haunting themselves, a clever way to keep anyone from looking too closely. Now this man had come. He had not been fooled. He knew. Her heart hammered a frantic, bird-wing rhythm against her ribs. He had left food, a test, a trap, but the scent of the water, clean and pure, was a siren's song. She waited for hours, listening to the sounds of his labor outside, the grunt of effort, the thud of an axe, the rhythmic scrape of a shovel. It was the sound of a man building, not destroying. As dusk bled purple and orange across the sky, and the house fell into deep shadow, she finally crept from her hiding place. A wraith in rags, she snatched the offerings and retreated back into the darkness. The first taste of clean water a shock, a blessing, a pain in her parched throat. She did not know his name. To her, he was merely the man who did not shout. Days bled into weeks. The man, Silas, worked from sunup to sundown. He mended the broken corral. His hammer blows a steady heartbeat for the desolate ranch. He cleared the yard of tumbleweeds and debris, piling it high for a bonfire that burned for 2 nights, a pillar of defiant light against the vast, indifferent darkness. He never tried the door to the house after that first day. He slept in the barn, his bed a roll of blankets in the clean-swept hayloft. Every morning he left food on the porch, a bowl of steaming oatmeal, a piece of smoked meat, sometimes an apple polished to a high sheen. For Alara, this ritual became the new rhythm of her life. She would watch him from the grimy window of the parlor, a sliver of a face in the shadows. She saw the patience in his posture, the economy of his movements. He wasted nothing. Not a motion, not a word, not a piece of lumber. He spoke only to his horse, a low murmur that the wind snatched away. Her fear began to change. It did not vanish, but it shed its sharp, panicked edges, settling into a deep, watchful caution. He was not like the others. He did not carry their swaggering cruelty, their loud, empty boasts. There was a gravity to him, a stillness that seemed to absorb the chaos of the wind. One afternoon, a fierce autumn storm blew in, the sky turning a bruised, violent gray. Rain came down in blinding sheets, turning the yard to mud. Through the deluge, she saw him struggling to secure a flapping piece of the barn roof, the wind tearing at him, threatening to throw him from the ladder. Without thought, without decision, she found herself unbarring the back door. She ran, her bare feet sinking into the cold mud, her thin shift instantly soaked. She grabbed the base of the ladder, her meager weight a small anchor against the gale. He glanced down, his face a mask of rain and surprise. He did not speak. He simply finished hammering the board into place, descended the ladder, and looked at her. She stood shivering, mud splashed to her knees, her hair plastered to her skull. For the first time, they were face to face in the open. She could see the lines etched around his eyes, the gray at his temples. He was not old, but he was worn, like the land itself. She expected him to grab her, to question her, to finally end this strange, silent truce. Instead, he shrugged off his heavy canvas coat and draped it over her trembling shoulders. It smelled of rain, sweat, and horses. It was the first warmth, the first human touch she had known in almost a year. "The fire's lit in the barn," was all he said, his voice rough and used. He turned and walked away, leaving her to follow. That night, she did not retreat to the cold, dusty house. She sat on a bale of hay across the small fire from him in the barn, wrapped in his coat, and for the first time, she ate in his presence. Neither of them spoke a word. There were no words for the chasm of pain and loneliness that separated them, only the small, flickering bridge of a shared fire. The truce held, fragile as winter ice. Alara began to emerge from the house during the day, her movements still timid, ghost-like. She swept the porch. She tended the small patch of herbs her mother had planted, which had somehow survived. She would watch Silas work, learning the cadences of the ranch through observation. She saw how he checked the horizon, how he listened to the silence between the gusts of wind, how his hands, though calloused and strong, could be gentle as he calmed his horse. He, in turn, accepted her presence without comment. He started leaving tools out, a hoe, a small hand trowel, as if by accident. She began to use them. A garden began to take shape, a small square of order in the vast wilderness. The unspoken arrangement was a language all its own. He provided protection and substance. She brought a quiet life back to the dead heart of the place. The house slowly shed its feeling of a tomb and began to feel like a shelter. She even started to eat at the small table in the kitchen, while he would take his meals on the porch steps, respecting a boundary that had never been drawn but was deeply felt. The threat, when it came, arrived on a cloud of dust from the east. 2 riders. Alara saw them first from the kitchen window, and a cold, familiar dread seized her. She recognized the slump of the shoulders on one, the arrogant tilt of the hat on the other. They were the men who had bought the ranch for a pittance from her widowed father before his accident. The men who had told her she was part of the deal, their grins like gashes in their filthy faces. The men she had fled from, hiding in the house they thought was empty, listening to them give up the search and invent a ghost story to cover their tracks. She flew to the barn, her breath coming in ragged bursts. "They're here," she whispered, the words tasting like poison. Silas looked up from the harness he was mending. He saw the raw terror in her eyes, and his face hardened into granite. He simply nodded, taking a heavy rifle from the pegs on the wall. "Stay in the house. Bar the door," but as she ran back, a new feeling rose up through the fear, rage. This was her home. That silent, patient man in the barn had given it back to her, not with a deed, but with his quiet respect. She would not be a ghost in it again. She barred the door as instructed, but then she went to the hearth, her hands finding the cold, heavy weight of the iron poker. The men, Jeb and Caleb, dismounted with an easy confidence, their laughter coarse. "Blackwood," Jeb called out, swaggering toward the barn. "Heard you're making a go of it. Thought we'd stop by. See if the hauntin' scared you off yet." Silas emerged from the barn, the rifle held loosely in one hand. "It's my land now. State your business," Caleb smirked, his eyes flicking toward the house. "Business is, we heard a rumor that your ghost ain't a ghost at all. That maybe something we thought was gone. Wasn't." He took a step forward. "We figure what's on this land belongs to it, and we're here to collect." The meaning was clear, brutal. Silas raised the rifle slightly. "You'll collect nothing here but trouble. Ride out." Jeb's hand drifted toward his pistol. "Now, that ain't neighborly." In that moment of tense standoff, the front door of the house creaked open. Alara stood on the porch, the iron poker held like a spear in her white-knuckled hands. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with a fire hotter than any hearth. She was no longer a frightened girl or a fleeting specter. She was fury given form. The men stared, momentarily stunned. They had remembered a weeping, terrified child. This was a woman made of iron and shadow. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and clear, carrying over the wind. "Get off my land." The use of the word was a claim, a declaration of war. That small act of defiance changed the equation. Jeb, his bravado faltering, saw not one protector, but two. He saw the cold promise in Silas's eyes and the unyielding hatred in Alara's. He saw a fight he might not win. He spat on the ground, a final, empty gesture of contempt. "It ain't over," but his eyes said it was. They mounted their horses and rode away, their backs stiff with humiliation. The dust settled. The wind sighed, its voice softer now, almost gentle. Silas lowered the rifle. He looked at Alara, still standing on the porch, the poker held at her side. The terror had receded from her face, leaving behind an exhausted, fierce strength. He walked to the bottom step and looked up at her. For the first time, he allowed a trace of a smile to touch his lips. "Your land," he said, the words an acknowledgement, a confirmation, a shared ownership that had nothing to do with paper deeds. She gave a small, shaky nod, letting the poker fall with a clatter to the wooden planks. The sound was like a chain breaking. That evening, for the first time, she brought 2 plates to the kitchen table. She sat, and after a moment's hesitation, he came inside and took the seat opposite her. The silence between them was different now. It was not a void, but a space filled with a shared, unspoken history. It was the silence of partnership. The seasons turned. The harsh white of winter gave way to the tender green of spring. The ranch, once a place of ghosts and sorrow, was now a place of quiet, determined life. Under Silas's guidance, Alara learned the rhythms of the land not as a prisoner, but as a custodian. She learned to mend fence, to read the sky for rain, to handle a horse with a firm but gentle hand. Her limbs grew stronger, her face gained color, and her eyes, once perpetually wide with fear, now held a steady, clear gaze. She began to speak more, her voice finding its footing in stories about the plants in her garden, in questions about the cattle, in simple observations about the day. Silas, in turn, seemed to shed a layer of his own solitude. He would listen, his quiet presence and encouragement. He taught her not just how to survive on the land, but how to belong to it. He had bought a haunted ranch for $50, a place of endings, and found, concealed inside, a beginning. One evening, as they stood together watching the sun set, painting the valley in hues of rose and gold, he turned to her. "I never did ask," he said, his voice as soft as the fading light. "Your name." She looked out at the horizon, at the land that was now imprinted on her soul. It was a place that had witnessed her deepest despair and her greatest transformation. "It's Alara," she said, and the name, spoken aloud in this place of peace, sounded new. It sounded like hope,